I remember the first time I ever heard the phrase, go back to your own country, go back to your home. I was back in the US. I was a kid at the time. I heard someone saying it to another person, and growing up, I thought that was only a phrase that I might ever hear in the US. But over the last years, I feel as though I've been hearing this more and more from other places around the world. Maybe it's always been like this, and I'm only becoming aware of it now with the advent of the internet and all the connections with the different people that I have across the globe. It's not only just my own experiences that I've seen this with my own eyes, but also friends of mine across the world who've had maybe an instance or two where they've either seen it themselves or they had somebody telling them to go back home to their own country. And this has had me thinking about my own experiences as somebody born on the opposite side of the world from where he was born. Anyway, let's just jump into this episode. I'm Rafael and roll that intro. Like I said a few weeks ago, things are changing, and I'm now actually recording from a new space, and so bear with me while things are in their kind of transitory period. Having gone through a move, this is why I ended up missing last week's upload. But getting back onto this topic, I can understand why someone might be frustrated with individuals from another country coming to their own country. And not that I'm agreeing with it, but I can see the perspective that if you are seeing a change in your location, and whether it comes to the cost of living going up, or if the safety and security seems to be changing due to these individuals coming to your country. I'm not agreeing or disagreeing with any type of claim that anybody could be making about a specific location. But when you start seeing what could be a correlation, it doesn't necessarily mean there's causation, but there could be. I'm not denying that possibility. And recently I was reminded of a particular experience that I've personally had. And without going into detail about who the person is, but to give maybe a little bit of context, we can say that this individual would maybe offer a particular service for individuals both from their country as well as from abroad who would need something in a particular area locally within a particular nation. Specifically, we can say Portugal. Even though my dealings with this individual were on the negative side, I'm not going into detail about who they are just because I don't feel as though it's necessary for the context that I'm kind of trying to talk about here. My experience with this individual, having just moved to the country, Portugal, and starting to think about looking for a bank and thinking about where I might put my money and where I can receive my money from my regular salary. In my experience, it's been worthwhile in different countries to speak to locals and find out where they bank, what banks they think are better or worse, or why. And this particular individual made a very odd, we could say, comment about one particular bank that I asked them about. Oh no, you should never consider that bank. That's where the Brazilians go. You know those Brazilians. I'm like kind of looking at this person thinking, well, I better not say anything about being half Brazilian to this individual. So I'll keep my mouth shut and just hear whatever kind of crazy nonsense comes out of their mouth next. And then more recently, this particular individual had made a comment about Italians and said, oh, well, you're Italian, you wouldn't get it. All of you Italians are all the same. And I'm thinking, well, I'm from the US. Okay, granted, I have Italian citizenship, but like, what would be better if I were from the US? What would be the difference in our interaction if I were actually from the US? Or what would be the difference if I were from Italy? What does this matter with anything that has to do with the conversation between the service that you've already been paid for and to have this interaction where we are coming to a finalization and a closure to any type of interactions that we will be having? This feels purely unnecessary. And there are a number of experiences that I've had over the years that have matched something along those lines, where somebody might make a comment about a certain nationality or even about your own nationality. And you start thinking, well, do I want to continue to support this business or keep with these services? And maybe it's too late and you've already gone too far and you're actually using the person's services and you can't back out. But even recently, I heard a story about an individual in Braga on in the Facebook group about a local coming up in their car while this person was downstairs in their building and started screaming and shouting at them, go back to your country if I ever see you here again. We'll just say that the rest of it was not YouTube friendly, the types of threats that were made. So I'm not going to be going specifically into them, but we can just say that they were very intense and very not YouTube friendly. We're getting back to what I was talking about earlier. I've been thinking about this a lot recently. What if a person were actually to go back to their own country? I mean, granted, there will be countries that are just not an option for an individual to return to, but then there are going to be other options where maybe the person potentially could go home. And would it be worth it for them? Even then, there's the other factor that you have to think about that has to do with if maybe somebody has dual nationality, and maybe they have one passport, one country, one passport from another country, and they have the option of these two places. Which one is going to be home? Which one would feel more like home to them? Which one would be the best choice for that individual? Where would be going back to their own country? And even for me, I've thought about this. Well, for the US, I mean, I can't say that it feels like home to me. For my experiences in Italy, I can say it would feel more like home to me than the US maybe ever did. And even if I didn't live in the same location where I had previously lived, I could say that for me, maybe it would be a better fit, at least in that regard, than the US. For example, all the things that you have to go through on a daily basis, or maybe not even a regular basis, but having to take care of things such as, for example, do you have to open a bank account? Do you need to order your own birth certificate? All of these things. And if you're an American living outside of the US, then getting your birth certificate abroad can be a headache and a half, because you will not be able to order directly to your location. You'll have to talk to a third-party service provider to get that for you. I mean, even if you're from Italy, for example, I think there are some countries that might allow an individual to order a birth certificate through a consulate. Then there are other countries like, for example, maybe Brazil, where you can just order directly online, a certified online copy. I mean, I think that's an amazing possibility to be able to have as somebody who might need something at some point. But how many times in your life are you actually going to end up needing to order your own birth certificate? It might be a couple of times in your life, but say you never need it, whatever. But if you are moving abroad, I would say before leaving, it's worthwhile bringing at least a few copies of each of your documents with you, just because you never know what you might need or when you might need it. And if it's something that can be apostilled, then get the apostille to make sure you don't have to send it to the US and have to get things back and forth across the pond. It'll be very annoying, more than a headache, and could be quite expensive. And then another thing, another factor of life that you're not going to be dealing with on a regular basis, but at some point you will need to open up a bank account, more than likely, where you're going to be living. And one thing that I found very annoying in Portugal is not just with banks, but just there have been a number of instances where I've had to prove that I have the right to remain in Portugal. I get it. I'm not a citizen, and that I have to be able to show that I'm residing there. To me, it's a little strange, though, as a European citizen to be in another European nation. You're supposed to have all the same rights as a local would for the most part. But then there are certain things when it comes to identifying yourself that are just very much not the same. And so to me, that is a little bit strange, but I get it, because even if you are an EU citizen in your own EU country, you will still have to show your residence for certain things and prove where you live. I get that. But when you need another document, or you need this extra proof that you have the permission to remain, at least within the context of the European Union, to me, that's actually a little bit funny how that happens. Maybe if someone's from another nation outside of the European Union, that's a different story. Then I could maybe kind of get that a little bit more. Not that I'm saying, it's unfair to have to show that you have the proof to stay in the nation. It totally makes sense to me. I get it. But there are a number of instances when you will have to prove that you have the ability to remain in a nation. And for me, I find that extra step that I'm allowed to be here, that I have to constantly prove myself, a bit annoying. And one thing I remembered being back in Italy earlier this year was that I constantly had this feeling like I could breathe, like I could just relax and walk down the street and not have to think about can I stay here, or can I this, or can I that? Granted, I only was in Italy for a week earlier this year, but it had me really thinking about things, and had me thinking about what do I experience on a daily basis, and what are some of the things that might be in the back of my mind that aren't really important, but do end up kind of weighing on a person at the end of the day. Because say you create a life in a country, I've mentioned this in many episodes before, that you can create a life in a country, but not necessarily be guaranteed that what you're building, that foundation you're building for yourself, will be accessible. That you don't have the guarantee of being able to remain in that country beyond a certain point in time. So if you are going to back to quote unquote your own country, just simply being able to exist, for lack of a better way of putting it, is very underrated. And not having to think about visas, not having to think about permission or residency or this or that. I mean, granted, if you're a European citizen living in Europe, then there's a residency kind of thing that you do have to think about, but that's a whole different thing for a different day. But in the context of being a foreign national in another country, there are going to be certain hurdles. There are going to be certain things that you experience as an expat, an immigrant, whatever is the term that you want to use. And like many episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, I'm not here with a finalized answer to a question. This is just more a discussion to get someone thinking about maybe what they would experience living in another nation. Of course, you can go and live in a place and it can be wonderful and pizza, pasta, amore, fun, delight, and joy. But there are the daily realities that you'll be facing. And sometimes those might come in the form of how people might feel about you and how people might feel about people from your country or people that are just not from their nation. Because, of course, another factor that's really important is the social day-to-day aspect, thinking about how you're going to interact with people. If you speak the language, or if you don't speak the language, or if you speak with an accent, or if you don't speak perfectly, will you be able to make those local friends? And I've seen many instances of people thinking, well, like, I'm going to go to a new country and it's going to be great. I can speak a little bit and I'll get by. But then their only friends end up being waiters and waitresses in restaurants, and they don't make friends with locals outside of those contexts where individuals are being paid to interact with them. Not that I'm judging about that, but I do think it is worthwhile taking into consideration if your only social interaction are individuals that are being paid to interact with you. And there are going to be many places, including the country where I grew up, where there are many individuals who are just simply not interested in making friends with anybody that's outside of their circle. There's those people, those foreign people. And this exists in other parts of the world too. There are going to be other parts of the world where people are going to say, oh my gosh, I have to meet this foreigner. But then it's like a new toy where people kind of get a bit bored after a little while. And then whatever, you're just part of the furniture, just around. So then think about things from a social perspective. Will that have an effect on your daily life? Will you be able to meet those people? But if you're going to be from another nation and you still are not perfectly communicating with the others, will that affect your daily experience? Is that going to be a problem for you? And then from there, of course, thinking about, do you want to get into the expat bubble or not? Do you want to make friends who are also foreigners from your same nation? But then does that defeat the purpose of maybe going to another country just to begin with, to go and have these new explorations of these new cultures, different parts of the world, but then you go back to hanging out with the same people who you might have hung out with at home? Something about that to me doesn't necessarily click. I get it. And I can understand, and I've gone back and forth, as I've said many times, between like being inside of the expat bubble and then going completely the opposite direction. I think having a balance and being able to have your friends kind of in both is really nice. And it helps to have those friends that also understand what you're going through, as well as the friends who maybe are just wonderful people to enjoy the time with, that you're not connecting because of where you're from. You're connecting because of the situation that you're in, that you both experienced something together. You both have a particular interest in the same thing. Having all of these experiences abroad, though, while it can be wonderful, is it a challenge that you're interested in facing on a day-to-day basis? There's always going to be that extra little push, even for some basic, simple things that you'll need to accomplish. And going back to your own country, so to speak, can come with a level of being able to know how to coast, to being able to know how to just ride through life on autopilot, to at least to some extent. And that's what I had been thinking about recently with all of these stories that I keep hearing about. Go back to your own country, go back home, get out of here. And I think even though it is definitely coming from a very horrible place when it's said, it is sometimes worthwhile challenging yourself and your own perspectives on things to see where you might personally be. Anyway, that's it for this episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Thank you so much to those of you who help support this project and help it keep going on a monthly basis through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, as well as the thanks button here on YouTube and rafaeldifuria.com/support. And of course, this is an open conversation, so if you have any thoughts or ideas on this particular topic, feel free to leave that down in the comment section below here on YouTube. And of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I will see you all next time. Later.